Masechta Zevachim Daf Samach Aleph Amar Aleph. We're starting from 9 lines from Samach Amad Beis. At the end of Amar Aleph of Samach Amad Aleph, Abaye learned from the din of Bechair that kachim kalim cannot be eaten only when the mizbeach was sholid, was complete, without any blemishes. So Yimanik Yisrael Rabin, when the Rabin went up from Babel to Eretz Yisrael, Amil Shmaitik Hamid Rabbi Yirmiyah, he said this halach before Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, Bavloi Tipshoi, the Bavloim are foolish. Am to the Yas B'Yarech HaShecha, because they're sitting in a dark land, Amni Shmaitim HaChashcha. So they say dark teachings. Lo Yishmi Lahu. Has he not heard? Meaning, has Rabbi not heard how the Tanya, this that we learned in the following two Baraises? We're going to ask a statement from two Baraises. V'shasilich Masoyis, in the time when they took apart the Mishkan, and the Mizbechais at the time when they were traveling in the Midbar, Kodshim, Karbonis, after spraying the blood and burning the fats, Nifsalim become Pasal Achila because the Mizbeach now is not in its place, and you don't eat Basar Kodsh only when there's a Mizbeach. Nevertheless, we know that the Kedushas HaMachnes was not batal. Zavim Tzurayim, Ishtalken L'chutz L'chitzei. The Zavim, each one according to his din. A Zav was sent out of Machne Leviah. Mitzvah was sent out of Machne Yisrael. But the Kedusha, so you see, the Kedusha was there, but it was possible to eat kachim. Then we learned another price. Two places kachim would be eaten in the midbar. The kavanah of the brayse is that the kachim were eaten sai when the Mishkan stood in its place, and sai when they were traveling and the mizbeach was dismantled. My love, is it or not? These two places, what we're talking about, we have in order to answer the two brayses. The first brayse is kachim. This that we said that the karbonis were kachim were possible when they dismantled the Mishkan and Mizbechis while they were traveling. It's possible. It's talking about kachim. That can only, where it says by Kodesh Kadashim, we learned before, Shein Nachelas Ela Eitzel HaMizbech has to be eaten when the Mizbech is complete. That's what we learned out from Eitzel. That's the reason why it says Eitzel HaMizbech. But the second Braisa that says it's mutter to eat kachim when they dismantle the Mizbechis is B'Kadashim Kalam, which is not included in the Dasha of Eitzel. And that's why they were allowed to eat even after the Mizbechis were dismantled when they were traveling. Amar Ravina answers the Braisa according to Shita Abaya. Zu v'zu, both Braisa, so it's a kasha. So you see, I still on Abaya because the conclusion is that kachim kalam were eaten according to both Braisas. It was eaten even after the Mizbeach was dismantled, even when there was no Mizbeach. And Abaya says, no, it can only be eaten when the Mizbeach was around. Ravina said, either both. The Braises is talking about Kachim Kalam. By Kachim Kalam, Loi Kasha. And it's not going to be a stira between them. Because it's a machlekes of Tanoim. The first Brais that says you're not allowed to eat Kachim Kalam when they dismantle the Mizbeach, meaning without a Mizbeach, Rabbi Yishmael follows Rabbi Yishmael, who learned before from the Hekesh of Bechair, Basa Bechair, from Dam of Bechair. That just like Dam and Bechair, the Zika has to be on the Mizbeach, so to the Basa can only be eaten when the Mizbeach was around. So therefore, it cannot be eaten in a time when there's no Mizbeach. But the second Braisa that says Kachim, Necholim Mishnei Mekaimes, which means even when the Mizbeach was dismantled, Rabbanoni follows the Shita Rabbanu, who argue on Rabbi Yishmael, and does not learn that Hekesh, that the Basa B'Chair from Dam. And he says that the Basa may be eaten even without the Mizbeach. By saying, if you want, I'll tell you how both B'Raises is talking about Kachim. And nevertheless, you cannot ask Estida, because perhaps the second Braisa is Maida, also that you cannot eat kachim when there was no mizbeach. And this that it says that the kachim nacholim mishnei mekaymes, that kachim can be eaten in two places. He's not coming to be mechadish that you can eat kachim even while they were traveling and the mizbeach was not in its place. No, one is talking Mishkan. One, he's telling you that you're able to eat kachim in the time of the Mishkan and all the kelim were standing in its place Ka'alacha. And the second place he's talking about la'acha sheyipark alayim es kasher mishkan. After the Levium dismantled the kalei hachotza, the curtains of the yard or the gates, and they dismantled all the walls, and the only thing that was left standing was the mizbeach. I would have thought that this kachim cannot be eaten. It became nifzel. It's as if it went out of its walls, because if there's no walls, it's considered as a yetzer. I would have said, since the kloim were nostalgic, so it's as if he took out the kachim outside the walls and it became asur. And kachim outside the walls is asur. Kamash malan. That's why the Tana's come to tell you, even though you don't have the kloim there, the kedusha of the chatzah was not mizbatal, and therefore the kachim could be eaten even in that place as long as the mizbeach was there. And this is what the Braisa was saying, that the kachim is eaten in two places, meaning sai in a time when all the kelim was standing in its place, and sai when they removed the mechitzos. And you cannot ask from this Braisa, because like we said before, this type of Braisa was matter. The kachim is talking about in a case that the mizbeach was standing in its place. Only the walls, the mechitzas, were dismantled. But in a time when the mizbeach would have been removed, of course, the halacha would have been that you cannot eat the kachim. So the Gemara has on this biur. Let us say if the walls the mechitzas were dismantled, well, let us say it's asur to eat the meat. How do you? It should be considered as chutz l'mkaimai. Maybe. How do you know that the kedusha of the chatzah wasn't as bottom when they removed the mechitzas? It should be considered as he took out the kachim and lachutz. And the Gemara Amakra, it says in the pasuk nasa oyel meir, shehafa pisha nasa oyel meir. I'm telling you, even when they were traveling, it says when nasa oyel meir, that the oyel meir should travel. So here we see shehafa pisha nasa oyel meir, that even when it's traveling, it's still called the tent of the meeting, meaning that it's still called the Oyel Meir. So you see from here that even the shas of the traveling when the Mishkan and the Klein were dismantled, it was still called Oyel Meir. But again, that the kedusha of the Makam Mishkan was not this battle, and therefore it has a din like as if the mechitzas are there. The Mizbeach of Shilei was of stone. The Tanya Rabbi Braisa, Rabbi Yaakov, Ma Talmud Leima. What is the pasuk coming to teach us when it says Avanim Avanim Shalosh B'Yamim? It says Avanim Avanim 3 times. And we're going to say one Avanim is referring to the Mishkan in Gilgal, where it stood there for 14 years, and one in Shilei there it stood for 369 years, and then you had one with Neiv and Giving together. It was 57 years. So the Torah comes to tell you that la'asid there'll be 3 different kufis, 3 different mizbeches that will be built from Avanim. Echad shel Mishkan Shilei, echad shel Neiv v'Giving. One of Mishkan Shilei, like we said before, which was 369 years. And one from Neiva Giving together was 57 years. And the Mizbeach Hashlishi, Beis Elamim, the Beis Hamikdash Hashlishi, that's in Yerushalayim. Okay, Zog the Gemara and Yerushalayim, of course, is talking about Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis Hamikdash. And that was for days. Sagt die Gemara, Masi Ravach Barami is from the Braisa, Eish Yod Ben Hashmaim Mei Meisha Lein Istak Me'alam Mizbeach HaNechishel B'Mei Shleima. The fire that came from heaven in the days of Meisha didn't disappear from the Mizbeach HaNechishel, only in the days of Shleima. Kishabana Shleima is Mizbeach HaBanim B'Mei Seilamim. When Shleima built the Mizbeach of Avanim B'Mei Seilamim, Eish Yod and the fire that came down in the days of Shleima didn't disappear till Menashe came, and Menashe was a Rasha, and Menashe, who was the Melech of Yehuda, put up Mizbeches for Avodah Zarah throughout the whole land of Eretz Yisrael. and he put up a pestle in the Heichal, and of course he dismantled the Mizbeach, and the fire went away from there. And if it's taka, like the words of Ravuna, that the Mizbeach and the Chesed of Moshe had different tkufis. Shilai was also had a Mizbeach. It was a Mizbeach Avonim. So the Meikarahu this place. So we know the fire already disappeared from the Mizbeach and the Chesed by the Mishkan Shilai, because for many years, because the Mizbeach that was a Mishkan Shilai, that was before the Tkuf of Shleima, and it was a Mizbeach of Avonim. So if it changed Mizbeach, it had to disappear, and it disappeared many years before Shleima HaMelech's Mizbeach. So there's a Tana that argues on the Braisa. One second. So this Tana, there's a Tana that argues, and because on this Braisa, and we could say that Huna holds like him. Who the Amma? He says that the Mizbeach Shilai was Ma'avonim Kirabin Nasan, like Rab Nasan. A Tana that we learned in the Braisa, Rab Nasan name Mizbeach Shel Shilai Shel Necheshes Cholol, but it was empty Mali Avonim. The difference between the Mizbeach Necheshes of Moshe Rabbeinu was that it was filled with sand, versus the Mizbeach Necheshes that was in Shilai. It was also Necheshes, but it was filled with stone. So this that it departed the Eish from the Mizbeach Necheshes, it was still it's still called Mizbeach Necheshes. It didn't depart in the Tkufa of the Mizbeach that was in Shilai. So this that we learned in the Braisa, that the Eish from Hashmayim that was on the Mizbeach, Leit Nistalka, didn't depart only in the days of Shlomo. The Kavanah means that it didn't depart, meaning the fire departed partially in Shilai when they made a Mizbeach Havanim in the place of Mizbeach Necheshes. Leit Nistalka of Hatola, meaning it wasn't completely dismantled. Departed. The fire was still there on the Mizbeach on the Cheshes from the Tekufa of Shilai till Shleima. How do you explain that? The fire that was on the Mizbeach Necheshes would send a spark in order to help the fire that was on the Mizbeach Havanim it was a special fire. It was a fire that was in the shape of a lion, and it would zap the kabbanis. So it would throw a spark from the Mizbeach Necheshes on the Mizbeach Havanim. Now Papa says no, that it was like a guest, and sometimes it stayed on the Mizbeach Necheshes, and sometimes it would jump onto the Mizbeach Havanim. So the Gemara, now we'll talk about the measurements of the Mizbeach HaChitzin that was in the second bay. Is not Hasam. We learned that Yossi said in the beginning of Bayis Tishain there was lechatchila 28 amas. When they came from Bavel and they built the Beis Hamikdash and this Beis Hamikdash Hasheni, I see for love Arba Amas ben Adanim, Arba Amas ben Hamaydev, Kimin Gama. They built another 4 amas from the south and 4 amas from the Maidev. Originally, really, when we say 28 by 28, it was 32 by 32, but you had to remove the Amma of the Yesod and the Amma of the ledge from 2 sides, so it's 4 Amas off, because it's on both sides, so that would make it from 32 to 28 when you deduct 4 from 32. But he says when it came to the Mizbeach, the second Mizbeach, when they came from Babel and built the Mizbeach, in the second Beis Hamikdash, they added 4 Amas from Danim and Maidev. So like a L shape, they added 4 amas. My time, what was the purpose of it? Because they didn't have enough room to shecht all the kabbanis. Amalei Abaya answered to Rabbi Yosef, Hashda now b'mikdash l'sibei. That the pasuk says Allah Am Shahayu Ba'aretz. Beisahi Madach that we find by the first Beis Hamikdash. It says that the pasuk says on the nation that was in that time. Yehuda, he saw Rabin Kachil Ashas Vasayam. And nevertheless, it says that Yehuda Yisrael was so many, like the sand of the beach. There was millions of Yidden. And nevertheless, that small Mizbeach was sufficient for their Kabbanis. Mikdash Sheni, where there was only very few that came up from Babel. The whole call was like 42, 600. I'm sorry, 362,000. So by the first place of English, which you had so many millions of Jews, like the sand of the beach, where we learned before it was only 5 by 5, the Mizbeach of Mesha, and it was only all sacrificed on one Amma. Here, the Dechsib Kol HaKol Ke'echad Abba Ribui, there was 42,000. Lo Yisapik shouldn't be enough? For sure. It was a much bigger Mizbeach. Amalei, Rav Yisrael said, Hasam, Eishol Shomayim Misayatim. There, by the Kabbanis of Moshe Rabbeinu, where there was millions of Jews, they had the fire assisting, the zapping away the carbon like nothing. So it assisted in burning the Kabbanis swiftly. But by the second Beis Hamikdash, they didn't have this fire helping them to dismantle, to zap away the Kabbanis and burn the Kabbanis right away. When Rabbi came to Eretz Babel, he said, in the name of Rabbi Shimon Pasi, Mishum Bar Kapora, Shisin Hisifu, that there was holes that they, and pipes, holes that they added in the top of the Mizbeah, the kind of drainage from Maravis, to that the pipes should be inside the walls. So that's why they extended the walls, 4 amis on the Darim, and the 4 amis on the, from Darim and 4 amis from Maidiv, so that the pipes should be concealed in the walls. And from there it went down to the Amma. So it went down to the drain. In the beginning by Bais Station Saba, they thought that Mizbach Adama Shuhu Atum Ba'adama. It has to be, the Mizbeach has to be filled with the earth, and therefore there weren't allowed to be any holes in it, in the wall, and it had to come off the wall and go down the drain. Well, I'm sorry, but by Sheni Sabar, Shtei Sham Mizbeach Tzich but by Ka'achila. But in the second Mizbeach, by the second Beis Hamikdash, they said that L'cheda has to be like Achila. By the second Beis Hamikdash, they thought that the Mizbeach's drinking must be the same as the eating. Just like the Mizbeach ate the fats, so too it has to drink the Sachim. So therefore, I would have said it has to pass through the Mizbeach. Like, what my Mizbeach Hadamah? So what is we said you're not allowed to have any holes in the Mizbeach. It says it has to be a Mizbeach of earth. And when you want to show it's meant that it's attached to the earth. It shouldn't be built on arches, and nor on caves or cavities.